Unbroken the Podcast with Madeleine Black. Healing through storytelling.
Welcome to Unbroken the Podcast with me, Madeleine Black, where I am speaking to people that have been through tough times but have bounced back in life, actually bounced forward, and they are now really, through the work they're doing, making a difference for others. So today my guest is Laura Pearson. Laura has an MA in creative writing from the University of Chichester. She spent a decade living in London and working as a copywriter and editor for QVC, Expedia, Net-a-Porter, EE and the Ministry of Justice. Now she lives in Leicestershire, where she writes novels, blogs about her experience of breast cancer, runs the Motherload book club and tries to work out how to raise her 2 children. Welcome, Laura. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. I'm very well.
Oh, good. So the first question that I ask everyone who comes on the show is, what does the word unbroken mean to you?
I think like to have a word with broken in it, but to be the opposite of broken is it kind of brings to mind that quote about is it Japanese pottery that has cracks in, and the cracks are what makes, and then they've like painted with gold, and the cracks are what makes it beautiful.
Yeah.
So I guess it makes me think of that, like not shying away from the brokenness, but kind of accepting the brokenness.
Yeah, that's a really lovely answer. I think it's called kintsugi, something like that.
Yeah, and there's a Leonard Cohen song that says there is a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in, and that's always meant quite a lot to me, that quote.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Mm.
So you are a novelist now, but it was really when you were diagnosed with breast cancer that the birth of your books came about as well.
Yeah, it was. In a funny sort of way, the cancer gave me a bit of a kick. I'd already written novels. I was already, I thought, kind of determined to make this happen, but it was only after having cancer that I really pushed until it happened.
And you were diagnosed with cancer when you were pregnant, weren't you?
Yeah, I was 35 and I was 5 months pregnant with my second child.
And we tend to think when you're pregnant that you're protected, that you have these super hormones, that nothing can harm you or when you're feeding, but clearly that is not the case.
No, I think actually the opposite is the case, in that, I mean, it's not to kind of fearmonger or anything like that, but all the hormones that are rushing around your body when you're pregnant, I think if there is something growing, those hormones kind of allow it to run riot, basically. So it is, I mean, I'd never heard of it before it happened to me, but there is a charity that's dedicated solely to helping women who are diagnosed with cancer, either in pregnancy or in the first year of their child's life. So when I found that charity, I thought, you know, this must happen to a reasonable number of people for this charity to exist. And like with all these things, it's finding the other people who've been through something similar. I think that's like a turning point, isn't it, in terms of getting through, because you need to talk to people who understand.
Absolutely. So that was reassuring for you to meet people that had also had a similar experience and had come out of it as well.
Yeah, you need to look ahead, don't you, to people who are further down the line and getting on okay. So there's a support group I'm in for women under 45 who have been diagnosed with breast cancer, and I used to just look for the posts on there that were people saying, hey, I had treatment 3 years ago and this is me with my children. Not all of them have been diagnosed in pregnancy, but they were all young women who'd had breast cancer, and people would post saying, I lost all my hair and this is my hair now, you know. So I've stayed in all those groups, even though some people have said, don't you want to just put it behind you and move on? I've said I need to be that person for other people that says, look, I'm okay, I'm 4 years down the line and I'm still here. I think you really need that hope when you've just been diagnosed.
They're stories of hope, really, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. But how pregnant were you? You'd already had a little boy. He was about 2.5, wasn't he?
Yeah, my son was 2.5, and I found the lump on the day that we went for the 20-week scan. So the day that we found out we were having a girl, and that everything, so halfway through the pregnancy and everything was looking fine. It just happened that morning when I was getting dressed to find the lump, and I showed my husband, and he said, yeah, you should get it checked. And I made a GP appointment that day. And I think it was 2 or 3 days later, I went to see the doctor, and she said she wasn't sure. I was expecting her to say it's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm glad she didn't, because I do know other people who've struggled to get a diagnosis because they're pregnant, and your body changes such a lot, and you can have blocked ducts as your breasts prepare for feeding and that kind of thing. So she was really honest with me. She said, I don't know what it is. I'll refer you to the breast clinic. You'll get an appointment within 2 weeks. That's the procedure, how it works. And I went along to that appointment on my own. My husband asked if I wanted him to go with me, but it was kind of late in the day, and I said, no, one of us needs to get our son from nursery.
You were thinking it's just a fatty lump or something like that?
Yeah, and I mean, I wasn't diagnosed that day, but I wasn't expecting the appointment to be too difficult, but they did do a biopsy that day, which was quite painful. And also I just had a moment where I was changing into a hospital gown with my kind of very obvious pregnancy bump and on my own, and just suddenly felt like this isn't right, you know, to be changing into a gown when it's not something to do with the pregnancy. It just felt, and everybody else in the waiting room was much, much older than me, and people were looking at me, not anything negative, but I think people were kind of wondering, like, is she, because sometimes I've been for appointments with my mum and people just assume it's my mum who's having the appointment. So yeah, I found that day really hard. I came out of the appointment and I just sat in and cried. And then when I was actually diagnosed a couple of weeks later, my husband was with me, because I think by then I knew it wasn't going to be good news.
I guess when they do a biopsy, they want to check it further, really, don't they? They've seen something that concerns them. What must have been like the diagnosis? Must have been such a shock.
It was just so terrifying, because I always say this, but you just have this instinct to protect your child when you're pregnant, or obviously after the child's born as well, but when you're carrying the child, you just instinctively put your hands on your bump, or like if you fall, you're trying to protect the bump. It's just second nature. And so it just felt like a massive failing in that sense. And I thought they would tell me I had to terminate the pregnancy. So yeah, I didn't really think I was initially, because I was thinking about what it meant for the pregnancy.
Mm-hmm. When you say it was a massive failing, it's almost as if you feel like you're guilty.
There's definitely some guilt. I feel guilty. I know it's not my fault, but also we'll probably get onto this, but I have the gene mutation that puts me at high risk of breast and ovarian cancer, and there's a 50% chance that my daughter will also have that, and we won't know until she's an adult because she can't be tested. And I feel awful about that. I look at her, she's 4 years old, and I think about her having to make decisions about having preventative surgery, or God forbid, actually having to go through breast cancer. And it's just, when you're a mum, it's just, you'd much rather go through it yourself than see your children go through it. And so I think, because hopefully it's all over for me now, but the little thing that's kind of niggles away at me is that it might not be over for her.
And I guess your son won't develop the BRCA gene, but he could be a carrier as well.
Yeah, he could have the BRCA gene, and it can have, there can be an increased risk of prostate cancer, but it's not as serious in men as in women. So yeah, I tend to forget about him, to be honest, and I tend to think about her. But yeah, both of them could have. I mean, it's 50-50 chance. So sometimes I feel positive about it and think maybe they won't, but we won't know for years, so there's no point dwelling on it, I suppose.
So you are pregnant. Did you have to wait till you had your baby till they started treatment?
No, there's different ways they do it depending on how pregnant you are. So because I was quite over halfway through the pregnancy, the first thing they wanted to do was surgery to remove the cancer, and they did that while I was still pregnant. I was 27 weeks pregnant, and they said there was a small chance that the anaesthetic would send me into early labour, so that was terrifying.
You say it so flippantly, like it's nothing. It could send me into early labour. That is quite a thing to hear when you're pregnant.
Yeah, because 27 weeks is like, there's good survival rates at that stage, but you would definitely be facing several months with the child in hospital and on, needing support. So, I mean, they felt, I was just guided by the experts the whole way through. I thought if they feel like this is what we should do, then that's what we should do. I was having the surgery at a hospital that didn't have a maternity unit, so they had this plan to send me by ambulance to the nearest hospital that did have a maternity unit if I went into labour. So when I came round from the surgery, it was all about, I didn't even think about what I looked like or what scars I had. It was just like, I'm still pregnant and everything, I just anticipated waking up and suddenly being in labour.
Yeah.
And that was quite terrifying. So to wake up and they thought it had gone well. They got clear margins, which means they think they'd got everything out and the baby was still inside. So yeah, the fact that I could have general anaesthetic while I was pregnant was shocking to me.
It is, isn't it? It was a lumpectomy rather than a mastectomy.
Yes, it was. I was in and out the same day. I was home to read my son's bedtime story that night. Sorry?
That's quite incredible, really, isn't it?
Yeah, the recovery wasn't bad at all, but it ended up not being the only surgery I needed, unfortunately. But to continue the treatment story, they could have started chemo while I was still pregnant because it doesn't go through the placenta. But by the time they decided what I needed, I was about 33, 34 weeks pregnant. So they booked me in for an induction at 35 weeks. Mm-hmm. They were fairly confident. They'd done a lot of scans and they thought she was big enough. And so I had her at 35 weeks. And then when she was a week old, I started chemo.
That is, you've got a little toddler, you've got a week-old baby, and you are going for treatment. That's a lot. It's tough anyway to suddenly become a parent of two because it's a lot more work, really, isn't it? But then to mix chemo into all of that, how did you cope?
We had a lot of help. Both my parents and my husband's parents were amazing. My husband's parents moved in for a good while because my daughter got very ill just after she was born and had to go up to Sheffield for intensive care, and my husband went up there with her for 11 days. So he wasn't even here when I had my first chemo. So he was supposed to come with me to chemo, but my mum came with me instead. And I remember that day that I went for chemo, I had to do a small surgery here to fit a port that they then administer the chemo drugs through. And it's local anaesthetic, so you're awake and they're talking to you. And the surgeon said, "Oh, you're very good. You haven't complained." And I said, "I gave birth 7 days ago, so this is really nothing." But yeah, it's more one of those things that you just get through, and then you look back and think, how did we get through it? Because just the day-to-day managing of looking after our son, who was too young to understand any of it, and we didn't want to worry him, so we were trying to keep things as normal as possible. And then our daughter was very ill. We didn't know whether she'd survive. My husband wasn't there. I was having chemo, and I was fully expecting chemo to involve just throwing up and being really poorly for days, and it didn't for me. I was never sick. But when I was going up to Sheffield to visit my daughter, I always had a sick bowl in the car, and I just thought, this is just ridiculous. Like, this situation is ridiculous. All these things to happen in your life maybe, but for them all to happen at the same time, it just...
I mean, one of them would be enough for most people to deal with, and you're juggling all these balls in the air at the same time.
Yeah, it did feel a bit like, how can all this be happening? But luckily, within about 3 weeks, we had our daughter home and completely well, like everything. She was very seriously ill, but once she was better, there was nothing kind of lasting. So then it was just the kind of juggling of the, night feeds and the sleepless nights, which I did most of with our son because I was breastfeeding. I wasn't allowed to breastfeed her for obvious reasons. And
how did that feel, having fed one and not being able to feed the other one?
Yeah, I felt terrible about it.
We do that to ourselves, mothers, don't we? Make us so guilty.
Yeah, and she's been she's had bronchiolitis a couple of times, and it always goes through my mind. She didn't have the antibodies from me because I didn't feed her. She actually had breast milk for about a week, her first week, from the hospital, from Sheffield, which was amazing. Donated breast milk, but
I've done that in the past as well. I was part of the milk bank.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Because I didn't, when I was breastfeeding my son, I didn't pump very much, and I certainly didn't have like excess. It used to take me ages to get enough for a bottle, but I know people who are just like, I've just got milk coming out, like so much milk. So it's amazing because it's just like a magic potion, isn't it? But it was actually the best thing because it meant that anybody could have her. So my parents used to take her overnight so that Paul could sleep. That's my husband. And Paul did a lot of the nights. It's all a bit of a haze to me, but I don't think I did much of the night feeding at all. But if I'd been breastfeeding, I would have been on my own with it. And so it was a really good thing that I couldn't do that.
And how long did your chemo last for?
I had 6 rounds and they were every 3 weeks. So I started in June and I finished in October.
It's a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky I didn't have any of them delayed because they have to test your bloods each time. And if you're ill or anything like that, they can be delayed. And so I had an end date in mind. I was supposed to finish early October and I did finish. It all went to plan. And my son's birthday is in late October. And so I always had it in mind. It'd be nice to have it finished by his birthday. And I was. But by then I'd found out that I have the BRCA gene.
Yeah, so it was like the following months, wasn't it? You then had mastectomy in your ovaries, but I can't remember which way around it was. You had
my ovaries, so it's called an oophorectomy. My ovaries removed in November, and then the January following, I had a double mastectomy. So my daughter was 6 months old by then. Oh. So yeah, in the first 6 months of her life, I had all the chemo, and then an oophorectomy and a double mastectomy.
That's a lot to go through, isn't it?
Yeah, I think because I'd never had surgery before, and I don't think I realised how much of a toll it takes in terms of just really wiping you out and making you tired. And obviously, the bigger the operation, the longer that's for. So the double mastectomy was the biggest of the 3 ops I'd had to that point. And again, we had a lot of family support and friends. But yeah, I was knocked out for a bit, and just I think women have this tendency to get annoyed about what they're not getting done because they've always got so much to do. And I used to do that, even though I'm not very good at kind of giving myself a break and saying, just it's all right, it's okay, just chill out.
And I'm imagining that you had your ovaries out as well, that you were then plunged into menopause.
Yeah, surgical menopause, which means it all happens immediately. There's no kind of gradual easing into it.
There's no perimenopause. You're just right into it.
In it, and you're not allowed to have any HRT because my breast cancer was estrogen driven, so you're not allowed any hormones. So I haven't had a terrible menopause, but yeah, I had hot flushes and all sorts of I mean, when you've got young children, you don't know, like, is this to do, I'm tired all the time. Is this to do with having young children, or is it to do with menopause or the surgery? I didn't really know what to blame on what, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I was just tired all the time.
You must have been exhausted with just all of those things to go through. And whilst you were going through all this, you started to write a blog, didn't you?
Yeah, I wrote a blog called Breast Cancer and Baby. I started it, well, for a few reasons. I mean, I was a writer anyway, so it's how I kind of process things. So it made sense to me to write it down. And then I shared it because I had so much admin to do in terms of keeping people up to date with what was going on. I used to get messages through Facebook and email and text and WhatsApp. And every evening when I sat down, it'd be like, right, I've got to get back to everybody. And I thought, if I had this blog, I could just say to everybody, this is the latest, this is like where we're up to.
You could keep them informed in the one place.
Yeah, so that's what I did. And also I just wanted to kind of put something out there and I thought hopefully one day somebody will find it who's going through this and feels like they're the only one, which is the way I felt. And I have met people through it, virtually met people through it, and in real life, who've said it helped them. And so, that's the most you can do, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. And so I have read, it is book number 3 though, really, isn't it? I wanted you to know, which is, it's difficult. It's really difficult to read. It's just beautiful. It's heartbreaking. It's just, it's a book about, I guess it's like fears, and it's about love, and it's about relationships. It seems like this is like the worst case scenario. I don't want to give the plot away. I don't want people to read it, but it's like all of your fears seem to be in this book. Yeah,
I think I thought if I make up a character and make all the worst possible things happen to her, then maybe they won't happen to me. So it's like a projection exercise, I suppose. And also just for somewhere to put those fears, because it's really hard when you're going through cancer to say to the people who love you, I'm scared that I'm going to die, because they're scared that you're going to die as well. And it's hard for them to talk about and cope with. So I just needed an outlet for that fear. And that's the way it came out. And I wrote the first draft of it in the November of that same year. So just after I'd finished chemo, as part of National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo. And it just kind of poured out. So I think it was quite cathartic in a way. And it ended up needing loads of work. Like that initial draft, not much of that kind of remains. But it was, I think that's what National Novel Writing Month does. You end up with, you've got the seed of something or the bones of something, and then you can work with it. And it starts really with an author's note. So straight away we know it's based on your own experiences. But for people that don't know it, it's about a young girl called Jess. She's about 21, is that right? Yeah, 21 at the start. And she has a little baby called Edie, and she discovers that she has breast cancer while is she pregnant as well? No, it's just after, it's when her baby's very young. And it's really about her journey, isn't it? I don't want to give too much away. And every now and again there's a chapter called Dear Edie, I wanted you to know, and those are the chapters that broke my heart, where you just pour your heart out into, what happens if Jess is no longer here, and how she wants to educate Edie in life. It's kind of like life lessons or things that she's learned in her 21 years. Yeah, I think you can't help but go there in your mind, like, what if I'm not around? I used to think if I died, back then, both my children were young enough that they wouldn't remember me at all. And I'd had this really intense 2.5 years with my son, where I'd spent every day with him pretty much. And it just seems unfathomable that child could not remember you, but he was only 2.5. And so you start to think, what do I need to do for them? Like, what do I need to leave them? I know a lot of people who've had cancer young, and a lot of them got letters they've written to their children just in case. I actually haven't, because I've kind of written this book that is what I would want them to read eventually, because it's just about, I want to just express that love you have for your children.
And that comes across very beautifully in the book. That's why it's so heartbreaking, because it's a beautifully heartbreaking book, if that makes sense.
I wanted it to be life affirming as well as heartbreaking, and I think
with the heartbreak, and it definitely needs to come with a pack of tissues.
yeah, but I think there's things to be celebrated in the book, and some of them I didn't realize when I started writing it. Like, one of the big elements for me is the friendship between Jess and Gemma, her kind of childhood best friend, and I feel like it's a celebration of female friendship, and also, you know, mother-daughter relationships, because it's about Jess's relationship with her own mum as well as Jess's relationship with Edie. So yeah, I wanted people to come away from it wanting to live their best life. You know, people have said it makes you think about what you've got and appreciate what you've got. I didn't want it to only devastate people.
No, it didn't just devastate me, but it does. It makes you think, gosh, you know, I am grateful, I am lucky. I've never experienced anything like that. I have a mother who's just had breast cancer for the second time, but luckily she's doing great. But I've lived it through her, but I've never experienced it myself. But it's a really, really good book. I can see why it's so, I think it was 2019. When did it come out? Was it last year?
Like about just over a year ago, October 2019, because we wanted it to come out in Breast Cancer Awareness Month.
And it did, yes.
Yeah.
And this really prompted you, you said, while you were unwell with cancer, to get your act together, to be that writer, get your books published, to get them out there so people could read it. Explain a little bit about that.
So I had before I had cancer, I had 2 completed novels, and I'd failed to get both of them published. I'd gone down I'd had an agent, and we'd submitted one of them and it hadn't sold, and then me and the agent had sort of parted ways, and I'd felt like I didn't know what to do, because I had these 2 novels, but I thought, I can't approach agents with a novel that's already been out there and been rejected. So I felt like I had to write a new novel, and obviously writing a novel takes a lot of time, especially when you've got a child or children. But then I hadn't realised that there was this kind of middle ground between, because I thought the options were you get an agent and you go to the big publishers, or you self-publish, and I didn't want to self-publish. And so I didn't realise that there were small publishers that you can go direct to without having an agent. And a friend of mine who's an academic suggested that route to me, and I thought, oh yeah, that's worth trying. She'd read my first novel, Missing Pieces, and said, you know, I think it's good enough. I don't think you should just put it away and forget about it. So I went to 2 small publishers with it, and they both asked to see the full manuscript after I sent them the first 3 chapters.
It's always very exciting.
Yeah. After I'd had so many rejections, and then Agora, my publisher, they asked me to go in and see them, and I wasn't based in London. I was already up in Leicestershire, and I part of me was thinking they wouldn't ask me to go in just to say no thanks. But I didn't want to get my hopes up, because, you know, you have your hopes dashed so many times. So I went to London to see them, and they said they loved it and they wanted to publish it, and they asked if I had anything else. And by that stage I had the other completed novel, and then I had this 50,000 word draft of I Wanted You to Know. And so I explained that, and I sent them both to them, and a few weeks passed, and then they said they wanted to publish all 3. So they gave me a 3-book contract.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, just couldn't believe it really, because it had been such a long slog, and you start to just think, well, maybe I'm just not good enough. And I was actually talking to somebody on Twitter today who was saying, you know, when do you just think, well, okay, I'm not good enough? And when I look at the reviews I've had for my books, there's people who list these as like some of their favourite books, and you know, I've had really nice quotes from authors I admire massively. And so you think it's all just opinion, and it's subjective, and one of your rejections, somebody might just have had something too similar on their list, or, you know, there's so many reasons why people turn your book down. It doesn't have to be that it's not good enough.
Sadly, we know in the world of publishing that rejections are really normal. Our friend that we both know, Louise Beach, I think it took her 10 years to get published.
And she is one of the most beautiful writers.
I've read it.
Her book, The Lion Tamer Who Lost, is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. So it makes you think, who else is out there writing this beautiful stuff and being rejected? And you just hope that people don't give up, because and also I judged a competition with my publisher Agora recently, and it was really interesting to have we had a Zoom call to discuss the winner, and we had such different opinions on the shortlist. You know, some of us really loved something that others really didn't connect with, and vice versa. And so it just really brought it home to me that it's not like this work is good enough and this work isn't. There's so many kind of layers of this appeals to this person but not to this person.
Absolutely. I also think of John Mars, who used to, on his pinned tweets, used to have about a photo of about 85 rejection letters, and then he became self-published, and then he was picked up and published, and now one of his books will be a series on Netflix. So
yeah, and those stories like that are just amazing to hear. And anybody who's kind of still battling to get there, I'd really encourage them to read those stories and listen to those stories, because it can happen. And
absolutely. I had 25 rejections, I think, before I got my contract. So
really, I read Stephen King's On Writing, and he used to have like a nail on the wall, and he'd put a rejection letter or email, like pin it on there and flick through them. And when you see how successful somebody is, you think, oh, they probably didn't have any rejections, but you know, it's not the case, is it? So there's nobody that has no rejections.
So you also run the Motherload Book Club. Can you tell us? And I saw it's just recently surpassed like 10,000 people.
Yeah, just this week we went over 10,000 members.
Can you tell us why you started the Motherload?
Yeah, so the Motherload is a community that already existed, and I reached out to them back in 2016 when I was going through cancer to ask if I could write a blog for them about getting cancer in pregnancy. And so I did that, and then I just really enjoyed it's a really nice community. It's like all about being non-judgmental and being supportive. So I started blogging for them quite regularly, and then I asked the people who run it if I could start a book club for them, because I thought if I just start one myself, nobody knows who I am. I knew it would grow much quicker if I did it, you know, with an already established name. And so we had a bit of talk about it. They said yes, we set it up, and I was expecting it to maybe have a few hundred members. Like, we have a monthly read-along book. It's just grown beyond any of our expectations, and it's kind of taken over. It's become a huge part of what I do, and I have to balance my own writing with it, because, you know, the bigger something like that gets, the more attention it needs. But it's a really lovely space. I'm really proud of it, because we're really hot on getting rid of anybody who isn't very kind. It's all about love of reading. We don't want anybody to feel ashamed of what they like or what they read. It's not about, you know, reading literary fiction only. It's about just a love of reading. And you know, so many people have contacted me and said that it's got them back into reading after having children, and that's just a wonderful thing. So yeah, that's another thing that kind of takes up a lot of my time.
But also, you're still writing though, aren't you? What's happened now after you've had this book deal for the 3 books? What book are you up to now?
So I've had one. Well, I've got 2 that are written. Mm-hmm. One's in the middle of edits. I've got another draft written. So I'm kind of in a funny place where we need to go out on I've got an agent now. I didn't have an agent before. And we need to go out on submission with one of these fairly soon, I think, maybe in the next couple of months. So yeah, I've gone into the kind of more speculative area. So the novel I'm working on at the moment is about a woman. It's like a sliding doors novel, and a woman who has children in one strand and doesn't have children in the other strand, and it's kind of examining the impact on her life of that decision. And I've just got really interested in that kind of, what if this happened, or like, how different would things be if this one small decision was done differently.
They are amazing sliding door moments, aren't they? You can just miss a place by not being there for 1 minute and your whole life could have been altered.
It's like if you think about how you met your partner, and you know, like I met my partner at university, so if I'd gone to a different university, we probably wouldn't have met. And then you think, well, would this have happened in my life? Obviously you wouldn't have the same children if you had children, but I often think, would I have had the same life? You know, would I have lived in London? Would I have done this kind of work, or would everything be different?
So yeah, a curious mind then.
Yeah. So I'm always fascinated by that. So I'm kind of examining that in a couple of different ways with the books I'm writing at the moment. So fingers crossed for another publication soon.
Everything crossed for you. We're kind of at the end now of our interview. I just wondered if you have any tips for anyone that's listening, you know, something that really helped you to get through those dark days.
I think finding, like I said early on, finding other people who are going through the same thing and who you can talk to really openly about this stuff, because like I said, it's quite hard sometimes to talk to the people you love the most about your darkest fears. So I think it's well worth spending a bit of time finding online, especially in these COVID days, it has to be online, the people who can be your support network, and just kind of taking pleasure in the small everyday joys of life, trying to kind of focus on because you know, like in my situation, if you have children, it's very hard to get over something, because you're like on the go all the time, you don't really get to relax, but you do laugh briefly. I think like they make you laugh in one way or another every single day, and so it's kind of treasuring that those moments of joy.
I think that's a lovely place to end, just to laugh and have joy every day wherever you can find it. So Laura, I'm just so grateful for you taking time out of your busy writing schedule. We wish you all the best with your next novels, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Unbroken the Podcast with Madeleine Black, playing now on all the main platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher for Android, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and here. Play Unbroken the Podcast with Madeleine Black.